maid's humiliation was meant to be the joke of the night, until her daughter stepped forward and turned the laughter into silence. "Fix my Ferrari, and it's yours." The words cut through the ballroom like a whip. Preston Thorne's voice was smooth, mocking, dripping with wealth. Guests in tuxedos and glittering gowns erupted in laughter, their eyes fixed on the woman in the gray uniform, Elena, the maid. She froze, clutching her tray, shame burning across her face. Then, from the shadows, a clear, steady voice answered, "My mother accepts your offer." The laughter died instantly. A child stepped forward, a girl no older than 13. The crowd turned, their amusement twisting into disbelief. A maid's daughter, standing against a billionaire in his own kingdom. What began as a cruel joke in a billionaire's ballroom ended as a night no one would ever forget. This is the story of how a forgotten promise, spoken in cruelty, became the spark of an unforgettable reckoning. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A promise made in mockery is a debt waiting to be paid in humiliation. This was a night built to celebrate a man who had everything, but it would end by honoring a girl who had nothing left to lose but her mother's pride. The Thorne estate wasn't just a house. It was a kingdom carved into the moonlit hills of California. The grand ballroom was a cathedral of wealth. Its glass walls overlooked a city that twinkled below like a carpet of fallen stars. Inside, champagne flowed like water, and the air, thick with expensive perfume and quiet ambition, vibrated with music that had no soul. Men in sharp tuxedos and women draped in jewels moved through the light, their laughter as polished and empty as the marble floors they walked on. They were all satellites, orbiting the blazing sun at the center of their universe, Preston Thorne. And tonight, Preston had a new moon for them to admire. It stood on a raised platform in the center of the ballroom, a god made of metal and fire. A Ferrari, so deeply red it seemed to bleed into the light. The car was a masterpiece of Italian engineering, a sculpture of speed and power. Each curve of its body was a perfectly written line of poetry. Each reflection in its flawless paint was a mirror showing the guests their own awe, their own envy. This wasn't just a car. It was a declaration. It was proof that Preston Thorne didn't just own things. He commanded them. The scent in the room was a carefully crafted cocktail of power. The sharp, clean smell of high-octane gasoline from the initial engine roar still hung faintly in the air. It mixed with the buttery aroma of new leather from the car's interior and the oaky notes from $100 glasses of wine. It was the perfume of victory, a smell the guests breathed in deeply, hoping to absorb some of the magic for themselves. Preston Thorne stood beside his prize, soaking in the adoration. He was a man tailored by wealth. His suit was a dark, perfect shadow. His Italian shoes shone like black mirrors, and the watch on his wrist was a small, intricate machine that cost more than most people's homes. He wore a smile that was his most valuable asset, a brilliant, charming blade that he used to carve the world into a shape that pleased him. It was the smile of a man who had never been told no, a man who believed the world was a banquet laid out just for him. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace, his hand sometimes resting on a shoulder, his voice a smooth murmur that made everyone feel, for a moment, that they were important. But they were not. They were simply the audience, and he was the star of a play he wrote, directed, and produced himself. Working along the edges of this grand spectacle, almost invisible, was Elena Rodriguez. She moved with a quiet efficiency that had been perfected over years of service. Her uniform was crisp and gray, designed to help her blend in with the shadows. She carried a silver tray, collecting empty glasses, her face a mask of polite neutrality. But behind her dark, tired eyes, a storm of worry was raging. Every clink of a glass, every burst of laughter, was a reminder of the world she did not belong to. It was a reminder of the bills piled up on her kitchen table at home, the final notice letters, the constant, grinding fear that kept her awake at night. Her husband, Michael, had been gone for 3 years, and with him, all the dreams they had built. Now, there was only the debt he had left behind, a crushing weight that grew heavier with each passing day. She worked 3 jobs, scrubbing floors and polishing silver for people who barely saw her, just to keep her small apartment, just to keep food on the table for her daughter. Her daughter, Ava, the only light left in her life. Suddenly, a sharp gasp cut through the music. Preston Thorne had stumbled slightly, jolted by a guest who had leaned in too close. A splash of red wine arched through the air, landing directly on the pristine, white leather of the Ferrari's driver's seat. A collective intake of breath swept through the ballroom. The music seemed to falter. All eyes snapped to the dark red stain, a vulgar blemish on a perfect creation. Preston's charming smile vanished, replaced by a flash of cold fury. His eyes scanned the room, looking for someone to blame. The guest who had bumped him was already stammering an apology, his face pale with fear. But Preston's gaze swept right past him and landed on the nearest, easiest target. Elena. She had been nearby, about to collect an empty glass. She froze, her tray held tightly in her hands. You. Preston's voice was not loud, but it was as sharp as a shard of glass. It cut through the silence and pinned her in place. My staff is supposed to prevent things like this. What were you doing? Daydreaming. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Sir, I didn't. You didn't do your job, he snapped. He walked over to her, his presence looming. The crowd parted for him, eager to watch the show. Look at this. Do you have any idea what this leather costs? Of course you don't. He gestured for her to come closer to the car. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. But the eyes of 100 wealthy guests were on her, and her feet, heavy as lead, moved forward against her will. She stood before the open car door, looking at the stain. It was like a wound. Clean it, Preston commanded, his voice dripping with disdain. Sir, I don't have the right cleaning supplies for this kind of leather, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. It needs a specialist. Preston let out a short, cruel laugh. A specialist? Listen to her. She thinks she's a leather expert now. The crowd chuckled along with him. The sound was a wave of shame that washed over Elena. She felt her face burn. She stared at the floor, wishing it would swallow her whole. This was the worst part of her job, not the hard work, but the humiliation. The constant reminder that in their eyes, she was less than nothing. Preston, enjoying his power, decided to escalate the cruelty. A new, wicked idea lit up his eyes. He turned to his audience, a grandmaster of ceremonies preparing his next trick. You know, he began, his voice booming with theatrical amusement. My new toy here has been giving me a bit of trouble. He walked to the front of the car and patted the hood. The engine. It purrs, but not perfectly. My mechanics can't seem to figure it out. It's a delicate, complicated machine. It requires an expert. He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Then he turned his sharp smile back on Elena. But maybe I've been looking in the wrong place for an expert. What do you think? He asked her, his tone of venomous syrup. You seem to know so much about what this car needs. Maybe you can fix it. The suggestion was so absurd that the laughter from the crowd was instant and loud. It echoed off the high ceilings, a chorus of mockery directed at the small woman in the gray uniform. Elena's head spun. She didn't understand. Was he serious? I don't know anything about engines, sir, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Oh, I'm sure you don't, Preston said, circling her like a shark. But let's make this interesting. I'm a generous man. He spread his arms wide, addressing his guests. Everyone here knows this woman probably has bills to pay, a hard life, and all that. He waved a dismissive hand. So, I'll make you a deal. He leaned in close to Elena, his voice a low, taunting growl. You fix my Ferrari. Right here, right now. Make the engine run perfectly. If you can do that, he grinned, I'll give it to you. The car is yours. Title, keys, everything. You can sell it. Pay off your little debts. Buy a little house. Imagine that. The ballroom erupted. The laughter was deafening now. People pulled out their phones, eager to record the unbelievable cruelty of the spectacle. It was the perfect party story. The night the great Preston Thorne offered $1 million car to his maid if she could fix it. The punchline was obvious. She couldn't. Elena stood frozen, trapped in a nightmare. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to run, but she was surrounded. The laughter, the staring eyes, Preston's smug face, it was all a cage. She had never felt so small, so helpless. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying for it all to end. Then, a voice, clear and steady as a bell, cut through the noise. My mother accepts your offer. The laughter died in an instant. A shocked silence fell over the room. Every head turned towards the source of the voice. Stepping out from behind a large potted palm near the service entrance was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 13 years old. She was small and slender, with a cascade of blonde hair that fell over her shoulders. She wore simple jeans and a faded sweatshirt, looking utterly out of place in the sea of tuxedos and gowns. It was Ava. She had been waiting quietly for her mother to finish her shift. She walked forward, her steps measured and calm. She moved past the stunned guests, her gaze fixed not on the crowd, but on Preston Thorne. Her blue eyes, clear and piercing, held no fear. They held a cold, quiet fire. She stopped beside her mother and gently took the silver tray from her trembling hands, setting it on a nearby table. She then took her mother's hand, her small fingers wrapping around Elena's. Preston Thorne stared at the child, momentarily speechless. His perfectly orchestrated show had just been interrupted by an unexpected actor. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by amusement. This was even better. The joke had just found a new, more pathetic level. "And who might you be?" he asked, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "I'm Ava Rodriguez," the girl said, her voice unwavering. "And my mother and I accept your deal." The room remained silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer filled with mockery, but with a tense, buzzing curiosity. What was this? Was this part of the act? A child, standing up to the most powerful man in the room? The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Elena looked down at her daughter, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. "Ava, no," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "What are you doing? Let's go home." She tried to pull her hand away, to lead her daughter out of the spotlight, away from the danger. But Ava's grip was surprisingly strong. She did not look at her mother. Her eyes were still locked on Preston. "You made a promise in front of all your guests, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "You offered my mother your car if she could fix it. We accept." For the first time that night, Preston Thorne seemed unsure of how to respond. He had been playing a game with a pawn, and suddenly, a new piece had appeared on the board, one he didn't recognize. He looked from the terrified mother to the defiant child. The crowd was watching him, waiting. He couldn't back down now. It would make him look weak. A slow, reptilian smile spread across his face. This would be even more humiliating for them. The little girl's foolish bravery would make their failure all the more spectacular. "All right," he said, his voice booming once again. "All right. The girl has spirit. I like that." He turned to the crowd. "Did you all hear that? The maid and her daughter accept my challenge." A few scattered, nervous laughs rippled through the guests. This was no longer just a mean-spirited joke. It felt different now, sharper, more personal. Preston unclipped the gleaming Ferrari key from his belt loop. It was a piece of art in itself, red and silver, bearing the famous prancing horse emblem. He dangled it from his finger, letting it catch the light. "Very well, little girl," he said, his eyes glinting with malice. "The stage is yours." He tossed the key. It spun through the air in a glittering arc, a silver comet of possibility and ruin. Ava's hand shot out and caught it with a quiet slap of metal against her palm. She closed her small fist around the key, the cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of her skin. The entire room held its breath. The billionaire, the maid, the little girl, and the $1,000,000 machine. A drama in 4 parts. And the first act was just beginning. Ava turned to her mother. Elena's face was a canvas of fear. "Mija, please," she begged in a whisper. "This is a mistake. We can't do this. He's making fun of us." "I know," Ava whispered back, her voice soft but firm. She squeezed her mother's hand. "But he made a promise." And everyone heard him. For the briefest of moments, Ava looked away from her mother and towards the red car. A strange, unreadable emotion flickered in her eyes. Not excitement, not fear, but something deeper. Something that looked almost like grief. Then she looked back at her mother, her expression cleared of everything but resolve. "Don't worry, Mama. I'm not going to let him hurt you." She let go of her mother's hand and walked towards the Ferrari. The crowd parted for her as if she were royalty. Her small frame seemed impossibly fragile next to the powerful, aggressive lines of the car. Her faded sweatshirt and worn sneakers were a stark statement of poverty against the backdrop of unimaginable luxury. Preston Thorne crossed his arms, the picture of smug confidence. His friends were smirking, already anticipating the punchline. They imagined the girl fumbling with the key, not knowing where to put it, or getting into the car and being unable to see over the steering wheel. They were ready for a comedy. But Ava did not move towards the driver's side door. Instead, she began to walk a slow, deliberate circle around the car. Her steps were silent on the polished marble. Her eyes weren't looking at the shiny paint or the expensive rims. They were narrowed in intense concentration, scanning the machine with a seriousness that was profoundly unsettling. She was not admiring it. She was assessing it. She stopped at the rear of the car, near the exhaust pipes. She knelt, her blonde hair brushing against the floor, and tilted her head. She was listening, but the car was silent. What could she possibly be listening for? A man in the front of the crowd whispered to his wife, "What is she doing? Is she praying to it?" His wife giggled nervously. Preston's smile widened. The absurdity was even better than he had hoped. "Having trouble finding the door, little one?" he called out, his voice laced with mocking laughter. Ava ignored him. She completed her circle and stopped at the front of the car, her small hand hovering just over the hood, inches from the Ferrari emblem. She didn't touch it. She just held her hand there, as if feeling for a temperature that wasn't there, for a vibration that didn't exist. Her eyes were closed. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft fizz of champagne bubbles dying in a forgotten glass. The guests exchanged confused glances. This was not the bumbling failure they had expected. This was something else. Something strange. The child's calm was unnerving. It felt ancient, out of place in her young body. It was the calm of a surgeon before a difficult operation, of a watchmaker studying a complex gear. Elena watched her daughter, her heart torn between terror and a flicker of something she couldn't name. She had never seen Ava like this. At home, she was a quiet, bookish child. She did her homework, helped with chores, and spent hours in the garage with the dusty old toolbox her father had left behind, tinkering with the lawnmower engine or taking apart old radios. Elena had always thought it was just a hobby, a way for Ava to feel close to the father she missed so dearly. She never imagined it was anything more. After a long, silent moment, Ava opened her eyes. She turned and walked to the driver's side door. With a smooth, practiced motion, she pressed the hidden button on the handle. The door swung upwards like the wing of a great, red bird. The elegance of the movement, performed by such a small child, sent another ripple of surprise through the crowd. She slid into the driver's seat. The white leather engulfed her. Her feet, in their worn sneakers, barely reached the pedals. She looked like a child playing in her father's oversized chair. The contrast was so stark, so pitiful, that a few guests began to snicker again. The tension was broken. It was, after all, just a silly little girl. Ava didn't seem to notice them. She placed her hands on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. Her touch was light, reverent. Her fingers traced the stitching. She looked at the dashboard, with its array of complex dials and glowing screens. Her eyes weren't wide with wonder. They were narrowed, reading the instruments with a familiarity that made no sense. She took a deep breath, held it, and then let it out slowly. It was a cleansing breath, the kind one takes before doing something impossibly difficult. She inserted the key. She did not turn it. Instead, she pushed a small, unmarked button on the center console. A low electronic hum filled the car as the diagnostic systems came to life. Numbers and symbols flickered across the screen in front of her. Her eyes darted back and forth, absorbing the information at a speed that seemed inhuman. Preston, growing impatient, called out, "Are you going to do something, or just sit there? The suspense is killing me." Ava's eyes flickered up, meeting his in the rearview mirror. For a single, chilling second, her expression was not that of a child. It was the hard, knowing look of an adversary. Then, she turned the key. The engine sputtered. It coughed, a sick, metallic sound. It whined and then died. A wave of relief and laughter washed through the ballroom. The joke had landed. The comedy had reached its climax. Preston Thorne threw his head back and laughed, a loud, braying sound of triumph. "Oh, that was priceless," he roared, wiping a tear from his eye. "You killed it. My $1 million car, and you killed it." His friends joined in, their laughter a cruel chorus. Even the nervous guests felt free to laugh now. The strange tension was gone. replaced by the comfortable certainty of the world they knew, a world where maids and their daughters did not fix Ferraris. Elena buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The humiliation was complete. It was so much worse than she could have ever imagined. Only one person in the room was not laughing. In the driver's seat, Ava sat perfectly still. She stared straight ahead, her hands still on the wheel. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but her expression was not one of defeat. It was one of intense, furious concentration. She had heard it. In that brief, sputtering noise, she had heard everything she needed to know. The car had spoken to her, and it had told her all its secrets. Preston Thorne's laughter was a weapon, and it struck Elena with physical force. Each cruel chuckle from the crowd was another blow. She shrank into herself, wishing she could become invisible. All she could see was her daughter, a tiny, defiant figure engulfed in the blood-red symbol of their humiliation. She had failed to protect her. She had brought her into this world of careless gods and monsters, and now her child was being offered up as a sacrifice on an altar of wealth. But through the haze of her own shame, she saw that Ava was not broken. Her daughter was not even looking at the laughing crowd. Her focus was entirely inward, a deep, silent communion with the dead machine around her. Ava gently pushed the door open. It swung up with a soft whoosh of hydraulic grace. She slid out of the seat, her worn sneakers making no sound on the marble. She did not look at her mother. She did not look at Preston Thorne. She looked only at the car. The laughter began to falter, dying down into murmurs of confusion as she began to work. She walked to the front of the Ferrari and, with a quiet grunt of effort, reached for the hood release. She found it instantly, without fumbling. With a solid thunk, the hood popped open a few inches. She lifted it. The powerful engine was revealed, a labyrinth of polished metal, black hoses, and intricate wiring. It was a mechanical heart, beautiful and complex. To the guests, it was a mystery, a piece of abstract art. To Ava, it was a language she understood. Preston's laughter had stopped completely. He watched, a thin, unreadable smile on his face, as the small girl leaned over the engine bay. His arms were still crossed, a posture of relaxed superiority, but his eyes were narrowed. This was not the part of the script he had written. Ava did not touch anything. She simply looked, her gaze sweeping back and forth over the engine's components. Her head was tilted, her brow furrowed in concentration. It was the look of a master chess player examining a board, seeing not just the pieces, but all the possible moves, all the potential futures. The air in the ballroom grew thick with a new kind of tension. The amusement was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling curiosity. What was she seeing that they were not? She leaned closer, her nose just inches from a block of aluminum. She sniffed the air. Once. Twice. It was a strange, animalistic gesture. A man standing near the front whispered to his friend, "Is she smelling it?" Indeed, she was. She was untangling the scents. Beneath the sharp, clean smell of unburnt gasoline, there was something else. A faint, acrid odor. The smell of electricity that had gone where it wasn't supposed to go. The smell of heat, of metal stressed beyond its limits. It was a ghost in the machine, and she had just picked up its trail. Her eyes followed an invisible line from the ignition coil packs, along a thick bundle of wires wrapped in black protective tubing, to a small, silver box bolted to the car's frame. The engine control unit. The car's brain. She still did not touch it. Her examination was entirely visual, entirely sensory. She was a detective gathering clues at a crime scene. She noticed a tiny discoloration on one of the main wires leading into the ECU, no bigger than a freckle. A slight scorch mark, almost invisible to the untrained eye. It was all the confirmation she needed. After what felt like an eternity, but was perhaps only 2 minutes, she straightened up. She closed the hood with a gentle click, a sound of finality that echoed in the silent room. She turned to face Preston Thorne. Her face was calm, her blue eyes clear and direct. There was a smudge of grease on her cheek, a tiny mark of her trade that somehow made her look more serious, more professional. "I know what's wrong with it," she said. Her voice was not boastful. It was a simple statement of fact. A wave of disbelief rippled through the crowd. It was impossible. She hadn't used any tools. She hadn't run any tests. She had just looked and sniffed. Preston let out a short, skeptical puff of air. Oh, you do you? By all means, enlighten us, little genius. What is my team of highly paid, factory-trained mechanics missing? It's the voltage regulator inside the alternator, Ava said, her voice steady. It's faulty. It's sending power surges to the ECU. She pointed a small, determined finger at the front of the car. When I tried to start it, the final surge was too much. It fried a microprocessor on the main board of the computer. The engine has fuel, it has spark, but the brain is dead. It can't tell the engine what to do. The silence in the room was absolute. The technical jargon, coming from the mouth of a 13-year-old girl in a faded sweatshirt, was so jarring, so utterly unexpected, that no one knew how to react. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the confidence with which she spoke them. Preston Thorne's smug expression wavered. For the first time, a flicker of genuine uncertainty appeared in his eyes. He had expected tears or a tantrum. He had not expected a diagnostic analysis. That's a very specific guess, he said, his voice losing some of its commanding tone. He was trying to recover, to reassert his control over the situation. But it's just a guess. You can't possibly know that. It's not a guess, Ava replied, her gaze unwavering. The starter motor turned over at the correct speed, so the battery is fine. The fuel pump primed. I heard it. But the sound of the engine dying wasn't a mechanical failure. It was an electrical cutoff. A sudden death. Like turning off a light switch. She paused, letting her words sink in. And I could smell the burnt silicone from the fried board. A man in the crowd, a guest named Walter Heston who had made his fortune in electronics manufacturing, felt a prickle of shock run up his spine. He knew that smell. The girl was right. A fried microprocessor would have a distinct, faint odor of burnt silicone. He looked at the child with a new and profound respect. She wasn't guessing. Preston, however, was not a man who admitted defeat. He was cornered, and like any cornered animal, he lashed out. Nonsense, he boomed, his voice artificially loud. You read that on the internet. A lucky guess. You haven't fixed anything. The car still doesn't work. Your little magic show is over. He waved his hand dismissively. The deal was you had to fix it. You failed. He turned to his security chief, a large man in a dark suit who had been watching from the edge of the room. Frank, please escort the woman and her child out. Elena's heart stopped. It was over. The brief, insane flicker of hope was extinguished. They were being thrown out, disgraced. She reached for Ava's hand, ready to pull her away, to flee. But Ava did not move. I haven't failed yet, she said, her voice rising, clear and strong. I told you what's wrong with it. Now I will fix it. Preston stopped. He turned back to her, his face a mask of incredulous fury. Fix it? Are you insane? You think you're going to perform open-heart surgery on a Ferrari engine right here in my ballroom? With what? A hairpin and a stick of gum? I don't need a workshop, Ava said calmly. I just need a few things. Oh, this I have to hear, Preston sneered. What do you need? A new engine? A team of elves? I need a soldering iron, Ava said. A spool of 22-gauge copper wire. And a steak knife from your kitchen. The request was so bizarre that it stunned the room into silence again. A soldering iron? Copper wire? A steak knife? What could she possibly plan to do with that? Walter Heston, the electronics mogul, suddenly understood. His eyes widened. It was a crude, almost impossible fix, but theoretically, it could work. She was planning to bypass the fried microprocessor. She was going to perform microsurgery with a kitchen utensil. The sheer audacity of the idea was staggering. Preston stared at her, his mind racing. He was trapped. If he refused her request, it would look like he was afraid she might actually succeed. His pride, his entire public persona, was built on never backing down. If he agreed, he risked further embarrassment. But the girl fixing the car with a steak knife? The odds were 1,000,000 to 1. The story would be even better when she failed. He made his decision. A cruel, confident smile returned to his face. All right, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. All right, you little mechanic. You want a soldering iron? You'll have it. You want a steak knife? I'll get you the sharpest one in the house. He snapped his fingers at a member of his household staff. You heard her. Get the girl what she needs. And bring my toolbox from the garage. The big one. Let's give our little prodigy all the tools she could possibly want. He turned back to Ava, his eyes gleaming. You have 1 hour. If this car is not purring like a kitten in 1 hour, you and your mother will walk out of here, and you will never work in this town again. Is that clear? Elena gasped. The threat was real. He could do it. He could ruin them completely. Ava, no, stop this, she pleaded, her voice cracking. It's not worth it. Ava looked at her mother, and for the first time, she smiled. It was a small, reassuring smile, but it held a universe of confidence. It's okay, Mama, she said softly. I know what I'm doing. Trust me. She then turned her attention back to the car. The crowd, now a silent, captivated audience, watched as a bewildered-looking butler scurried away towards the kitchen and a security guard headed for the garage. The great Preston Thorne had called her bluff, but he had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought he was playing a game of poker. He didn't realize Ava was playing chess, and she was already 5 moves ahead. The tools arrived. A heavy, red metal toolbox was rolled out onto the marble floor. It was opened to reveal a pristine collection of professional-grade instruments, each nestled in its foam cutout. The butler returned, holding a professional-grade soldering iron and a spool of wire on a silver platter, as if serving a fine wine. Next to it lay a steak knife with a polished wooden handle and a serrated, wickedly sharp blade. Ava ignored the large toolbox completely. She took the soldering iron, the wire, and the knife. She looked around, then pointed to a small, ornate table that held a vase of orchids. "Can you clear that for me, please?" she asked the butler. The man, flustered, quickly removed the vase. Ava placed her 3 tools on the table. It was her makeshift operating station. With a focus that was both unnerving and mesmerizing, she went back to the car. She opened the hood again. First, she used the sharp point of the steak knife to carefully, delicately, slice through the black protective tubing around the main wiring harness that led to the ECU. She did not cut the wires inside, only their protective sheath. She peeled it back, exposing the bundle of colorful, thin wires within. Next, she used the knife again, this time with the skill of a surgeon, to carefully disconnect the ECU from its mounting bracket. She held the small silver box in her hands. It was the brain, the heart of the problem. She brought it to her small table. The guests crowded closer, forming a tight circle, craning their necks to see. They watched as she used the tip of the steak knife to pry open the ECU's metal casing. It opened with a soft pop. Inside was a dense, green circuit board, a miniature city of transistors, capacitors, and microchips. To the onlookers, it was an incomprehensible jumble. To Ava, it was a map. Her eyes scanned the board for a few seconds, and then, she found it. She pointed with the tip of the knife. "There," she said, though no one had asked. "You can see it. The T22 microprocessor. That dark spot is where it overheated." Walter Heston squinted. She was right. There was a minuscule, almost invisible bubble on the surface of one of the small black squares. It was the telltale sign of a fatal electrical surge. The man felt a chill. The girl was not human. She was something else. Now came the impossible part. She plugged in the soldering iron. While it heated up, she used her teeth to strip a tiny piece of insulation from the end of the copper wire. She then wrapped the exposed wire around the tip of the knife, creating a tiny, makeshift, and highly precise soldering point. The soldering iron was now hot. She picked it up. Her hand was as steady as a rock. The guests held their breath. This 13-year-old girl was about to perform brain surgery on a $1 million car with a kitchen knife and a hot piece of metal. And in his corner, Preston Thorne watched, his face no longer smiling. The sick, sinking feeling in his stomach was not indigestion. It was the dawning, terrifying realization that he had made a very, very big mistake. The tip of the soldering iron glowed like a malevolent orange eye. Ava held it with a surgeon's steadiness, her small hand not showing the slightest tremor. The scent of hot metal and melting flux began to rise, a strange incense in the temple of wealth. She brought the hot tip down towards the circuit board. It was a journey of millimeters, a voyage across a chasm of consequence. One slip, one twitch, and the delicate electronic city on the board would be a smoking ruin. Elena watched through the gaps in her fingers, her breath caught in her throat. She was witnessing something impossible, a collision of 2 worlds she never knew coexisted within her own daughter. There was the little girl who loved cartoons and struggled with her history homework. And then there was this focused, unnervingly calm technician who commanded hot metal and invisible currents of power with an ancient authority. She felt a surge of terrifying pride. Her daughter was a miracle, and that miracle was about to either save them or destroy them completely. Ava's makeshift tool, the steak knife wrapped with copper wire, was a stroke of desperate genius. The board was too dense, the components too close together for the thick tip of the standard soldering iron. But the thin, sharp point of the knife, heated by contact with the iron, could deliver a precise pinprick of heat exactly where it was needed. SSSSS. A tiny wisp of smoke, no bigger than a ghost's breath, rose from the circuit board. Ava had made the first connection. She was performing a bypass, creating a new neural pathway for the car's brain. She was using the thin copper wire to build a bridge around the dead microprocessor, tricking the ECU into thinking the damaged component was still functional. It was a lie told in electricity, a fiction written in molten metal. She worked without wasted motion. Her movements were a fluid dance of logic and precision. Touch, heat, a dab of solder, lift. Move. Touch, heat, dab, lift. The guests leaned in, their champagne forgotten, their quiet conversations dead. They were utterly captivated. This was no longer a joke. This was a masterclass in something they didn't have a name for. They were watching a child dismantle their understanding of the world, piece by tiny, intricate piece. Preston Thorne stood frozen, his arms now hanging limply at his sides. The smugness had evaporated from his face, replaced by a pale, waxy mask of disbelief. He was a man who believed money could buy anything: skill, knowledge, power. He paid his mechanics a fortune to be the best. And here, in his own ballroom, a 13-year-old girl with a knife from his kitchen was undoing their failure, exposing their incompetence. It wasn't just about the car anymore. This was a fundamental assault on his worldview. It felt like a personal betrayal by the laws of physics. 5 minutes passed. They felt like 5 hours. Ava's brow was beaded with sweat. The intense concentration was a physical weight. She was not just soldering wires. She was pouring her will, her focus, her entire being into this one desperate act. This was for her mother. This was for the sleepless nights, for the tired eyes, for the gray uniform, for every moment of humiliation she had ever endured. This was for the memory of a father who had smelled of grease and gasoline, a man who had taught her that any machine, no matter how broken, could be understood if you just listened to it closely enough. Finally, she was done. She set the soldering iron down. The last bridge was built. The new pathway was complete. She looked at her work, a tiny, glittering web of copper and silver on the green board. It was ugly. It was crude. It was a scar. But she knew it would work. Without a word, she picked up the metal casing and snapped the ECU back together. She walked back to the car, the silver box held carefully in her hands. The crowd parted for her again, a silent, respectful sea. She reconnected the wiring harness, slid the ECU back onto its mounting bracket, and with a final, decisive push, clicked it into place. She did not bother to reseal the protective tubing around the wires. There was no time. The hour Preston had given her was nearly up. She stood back from the engine for a moment, her chest rising and falling. She placed a hand on the hood, a gesture of quiet reassurance, as if speaking to a patient after a difficult surgery. "It's okay now. You can wake up." Then, she closed the hood. The sound, a solid thump, was a gavel falling. A verdict was about to be rendered. She walked to the driver's door, her face pale but resolute. She did not look at her mother, who was now openly weeping with a mixture of fear and awe. She did not look at Preston Thorne, whose face was a thundercloud of rage and confusion. She looked at no one. It was just her and the machine. She slid back into the driver's seat. The white leather felt different now. It was no longer a throne of mockery, but a command chair. She took a deep breath. She put the key back in the ignition. The silence in the ballroom was a living thing. It was a physical pressure. Every guest, every waiter, every security guard held their breath. They were all bound together in this one, single, impossibly tense moment. The fate of a maid, the pride of a billionaire, and the soul of a $1 million machine all rested on the turn of a small, silver key. Ava closed her eyes. She whispered a single word, so soft it was barely audible. "Dad." Then she turned the key. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. A dead, empty silence. Preston Thorne's lips began to curl into a relieved, triumphant sneer. She had failed. And then it happened. A sound started, low and deep. It was not the sick cough from before. It was a clean, powerful whir of the starter, followed by an immediate, explosive ignition. The engine roared to life. It was not a sputter. It was a detonation. A perfect, clean, ferocious sound. The V12 engine, the heart of the beast, bellowed with a power that shook the very foundations of the ballroom. The floor vibrated. The crystal glasses on the tables chimed against each other. The sound was a symphony of perfectly timed explosions, a roar of mechanical perfection. It was the sound of life. The engine settled into a low, rumbling idle. It was a deep, guttural purr, the sound of a sleeping dragon. It was smooth. It was flawless. It was perfect. Ava's small hand rested on the gearshift. She revved the engine once. A sharp, angry bark of sound that ripped through the air. It was a cry of victory. The crowd erupted, not with laughter this time, but with a spontaneous, thunderous wave of applause. Gasps of disbelief, shouts of "I don't believe it," and "My God," echoed through the room. People were clapping, cheering, staring at the small girl in the driver's seat as if she had just performed a miracle. Because she had. Elena sank into a nearby chair, her legs no longer able to support her. The tears flowed freely now, but they were not tears of shame. They were tears of shock, of relief, of a fierce, overwhelming love for her extraordinary child. Walter Heston, the electronics expert, was shaking his head slowly, a look of profound wonder on his face. Impossible, he murmured to himself. Absolutely impossible. But the loudest sound in the room was the silence of one man. Preston Thorne stood as if he had been turned to stone. His face was white. His jaw was slack. His eyes were wide with a horror that went beyond mere financial loss. This was a public execution of his arrogance. He had built an entire world around the idea of his own superiority, and a 13-year-old girl had just demolished it with a steak knife. The foundations of his universe had cracked. Ava switched off the engine. The sudden silence was even more dramatic than the noise had been. She got out of the car, leaving the door open in its dramatic, wing-like pose. She walked across the marble floor until she stood directly in front of Preston Thorne. She held out her hand. In her palm lay the red and silver key. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but carried the weight of a judge delivering a sentence. "You made a promise, Mr. Thorne." Preston stared at the key as if it were a scorpion. He looked at the girl's face, at her clear, unwavering blue eyes. He saw no triumph in them, no gloating. He saw only a calm, simple demand for justice. He looked around at his guests. They were all staring at him. Their faces were no longer filled with admiration or fear. They were filled with expectation. They had been witnesses. They had heard the deal. The maid's daughter had held up her end of the bargain. Now it was his turn. His mind reeled. The car. Give her the car? It was unthinkable. It was $1 million machine. It was his new prize. But what was the alternative? To go back on his word in front of everyone? To be known as the man who was not only outsmarted by a child, but who was also a liar. The humiliation would be unbearable. It would follow him for the rest of his life. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His carefully constructed world was crumbling. He had to say something. He had to regain control. "This is a trick," he stammered, his voice hoarse. "A fluke. You did something. You got lucky." Ava did not flinch. It wasn't luck. It was knowledge. "You made a bet you couldn't afford to lose." Her words were simple, but they cut him to the core. He couldn't afford to lose. Not the car. His reputation. His power. A dark, venomous rage began to bubble up inside him, choking out the fear. He was Preston Thorne. He did not lose. Especially not to the help. "Get out," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "Take your mother and get out of my house." "And the car?" Ava asked, her voice still maddeningly calm. "You're not getting the car," he snarled. "The deal is off. It was a joke. Can't you people take a joke?" A woman in the crowd, the wife of a powerful banker, spoke up. Her voice was cold. "It stopped being a joke, Preston, when you threatened to ruin her life. We all heard you. We all saw what her daughter did. Stay out of this, Cynthia," Preston snapped. But it was too late. The tide of opinion had turned against him. His audience was no longer his. They were hers. Elena, seeing the rage in Preston's eyes, finally found her strength. She rushed to her daughter's side, putting a protective arm around her. "That's enough, Ava," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Let's go. We don't want his car. We don't want anything from him. She tried to pull Ava away, but the girl stood her ground. No, Mama, she said, her eyes still locked on Preston. A promise is a promise. He needs to learn that. Learn. Preston let out a laugh that was more of a bark. What is a little grease monkey from the slums going to teach me? And that was his final mistake. Because Ava was about to reveal the last piece on the chessboard. The one he never, ever could have seen coming. The man who taught me how to fix cars was named Michael Rodriguez, Ava said, her voice suddenly filled with a deep, resonating sadness. He was my father. He was a mechanic. The best mechanic in the state. He could listen to an engine and tell you what it was dreaming about. Preston's face twitched. The name seemed to stir a faint, unpleasant memory. My father loved cars, Ava continued, her voice growing stronger. Especially rare, difficult cars. He used to have a small, specialty garage. People would bring him their impossible problems, and he would solve them. He had a gift. She took a step closer to Preston, and the crowd held its breath. 5 years ago, a man brought him a car. A very special car. A classic Ferrari, a 250 GTO. It had a problem no one could fix. An electrical ghost that made the car stall at high speeds. The owner was a rich, impatient man. He promised my father a huge bonus if he could fix it in time for a big race. The color was draining from Preston Thorne's face. He knew the story. My father worked on that car day and night, Ava said, her voice now thick with unshed tears. He rebuilt the entire wiring system by hand. He poured his heart into that machine. He fixed it. It was perfect. The day before the race, he called the owner to tell him the good news. But the owner didn't want to pay the bonus. He was arrogant. He thought he could get away with it. Ava's gaze was like a physical blow. So the owner reported the car stolen. He told the police his mechanic was trying to blackmail him. My father was arrested in his own garage, standing next to the car he had just saved. He lost everything. The garage, his reputation, his spirit. The legal fees buried us in debt. A year later, his heart gave out. The doctors said it was stress. But I know what it was. It was a broken heart. The ballroom was silent as a tomb. Ava raised her small hand and pointed a trembling finger at the billionaire. That man, she said, her voice ringing with the force of absolute truth, was you, Mr. Thorne. You destroyed my father. You destroyed my family. All for a car. She finally looked down at the key in her other hand. And tonight, you made a promise to his daughter, over another one. The revelation struck the room like a bolt of lightning. It was a twist so perfect, so poetically just, that it felt like something out of a Greek tragedy. The story was complete. The circle was closed. Preston Thorne staggered back, his face a grotesque mask of shock and horror. He looked from Ava's accusing face to the faces of his guests. He saw no sympathy there. He saw only disgust, contempt. He was exposed, stripped bare in front of the very people he had worked his entire life to impress. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny it, but no words came out. What could he say? He remembered the mechanic. The brilliant, annoying man who had fixed the GTO. He had crushed him without a second thought, a minor inconvenience in his grand life. He never imagined that a forgotten act of cruelty from his past would return tonight, in the form of a small, blonde-haired girl, to claim a debt he never knew he owed. Ava looked at the key in her hand one last time. Then she looked at the magnificent red machine her father would have loved. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed the key. It clattered onto the marble floor at Preston Thorne's feet, a final, glittering insult. "Keep your car," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, dignified scorn. "My father taught me that some things are not for sale. A person's word, a person's honor." She turned, took her mother's hand, and without looking back, they began to walk away. The crowd parted for them, their faces a mixture of pity, respect, and awe. As they reached the grand ballroom doors, Walter Heston, the electronics mogul, stepped forward. He blocked their path gently. He looked not at Elena, but at Ava. His eyes were filled with an expression of profound admiration. "Young lady," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I have never in my life seen anything like what you did tonight. That was not just knowledge. That was genius. Pure genius." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. He offered it to Ava. "My company builds some of the most complex circuit boards in the world," he said. "We have a foundation. We fund education for gifted young people. We give full scholarships to the best universities in the world. MIT, Caltech, Stanford, wherever you want to go. When you're old enough, I want you to call me. We'll pay for everything. Your education is a resource the world cannot afford to waste. Ava looked at the card, then up at the kind, smiling man. For the first time that night, her composure broke. Tears welled up in her eyes, not of sadness, but of hope. She took the card. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. He nodded, then looked over at Elena. "Your daughter is a once-in-a-generation talent, madam. You must be very proud." Elena, speechless, could only nod, squeezing Ava's hand. They walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind a ruined party and a ruined man. They stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights below seemed to shine a little brighter. The weight of their debt, of their fear, was not gone, but it felt lighter now, manageable. They had lost a battle for a car, but they had won a war for something far more valuable: their dignity. And back in the silent ballroom, Preston Thorne stood alone, staring at the red Ferrari. It was still beautiful, still perfect, but now, when he looked at it, he no longer saw a symbol of his power. He saw a monument to his shame, a shiny, million-dollar tombstone for his soul. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.